Coming up on the Paw Report, we're talking about reptile genetics. The topic sounds overwhelming to those of us who aren't scientists, but the information is fascinating. And to break it down for us, coming up is the Reptile Guy, Kyle Thompson.
Okaw Vet Clinic in Tuscola and Dr. Sally Foote remind you to properly take care of your pets and are happy to help support the Paw Report on WEIU. Okaw Vet Clinic located at 140 West Sale Street in downtown Tuscola. More information available at okawvetclinic.com.
Dave's Decorating Center is a proud supporter of the Paw Report on WEIU. Dave's Decorating Center features the Mohawk Smart Strand Silk Forever Clean Carpet. Dave's Decorating Center, authorized Mohawk Color Center in Charleston.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Paw Report. I'm your host, Kelly Runyon, and today's episode is really not for the squeamish. I would have to say that I'm borderline squeamish, but I'm doing okay, so hopefully you'll enjoy this episode too. We are joined by our resident reptile guy, that's kind of what we named him, Kyle Thompson. It's been a while, Kyle, since you've been back on the Paw Report. We're so glad you're with us today.
Glad to be back.
And you brought some friends. Actually, when Kyle came in, he was listing off all the things that he brought, and I thought, shoot, you brought your whole zoo with you today. We're glad you're here. It is kind of complicated. We're going to get into some reptile genetics on this episode, but before we get into the scientific and the difficult stuff, why do you think people have such a fear for reptiles? And I mean, I have a friend and I work with someone that didn't even want to come to the studio because she knew that there were going to be snakes in here. And that's not just for fun, it is a true fear.
Mm-hmm. A lot of what I think it boils down to is they are completely different in look and in behavior than what we're used to, being like the common pets like your hamsters, your cats and dogs. Ultimately what I think the fear stems from is a lack of actual education on them. Schools kind of skip over them. They'll tell you this is a lizard, this is a snake, this is a turtle and whatnot, but they don't ever really go into what we see around us. A lot of us out here think that there's venomous snakes all over the place. Any snake that rattles its tail is a rattlesnake, and misinformation like that. So ultimately I think that it boils down to misinformation. People just don't know enough about them.
And they kind of look scary too.
Some can,
they have that.
Yeah.
They have that look, and I think people fear of getting bit, or just the sheer look of them, as you said.
Yeah, with snakes too, a lot of times their strike, the speed of it is worse than the actual bite of it. And I think, because I jump and I'm used to snakes, my whole life,
right.
But when they strike at me, sometimes it's not uncommon for me to kind of, whoa.
On the flip side, Kyle, too, just as there are many people that fear reptiles, more people are turning to them as pets because they're fun and exciting and definitely trainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of that too. I think we can thank social media and the internet, because now it's a lot more common to see people interacting in a positive manner with their snakes. I know a lot of the big name breeders will have videos of them heaving around 18-foot Burmese pythons with little to no trouble, and showing how timid they can actually be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You mentioned that you've been around reptiles your whole life. What started your interest and continue to this day?
I spent a lot of time outside as a kid. I was an only child, so I lived out in the woods. So around me was always turtles, snakes and stuff like that. And they don't make the best pets. They're not exactly acclimated for that. So once I started getting into, I'm not going to say domesticated, but captive bred snakes, for me it was corn snakes and the like that. And what really kind of blew up with that was how easy they were to interact with, and just how many variations of color and pattern on just one species that I was, working with at the time, how many offset varieties of them there were. And it kind of sparked my interest to see, if this species can look like this, what can everything else look like out there?
Well, that leads me into my next question. When did you begin taking your reptile passion to the next level? I mean, as far as being a kid outside playing and I'd pick up snakes and it's not a big deal, to more of the genetics and the scientific aspect of
It was fairly early on for me. A lot of what it boiled down to was I was encouraged to be able to side identify, know what you're picking up before you pick it up. And you would start to see just within like the common rat snake around here, the black rat snake, you can get a black rat snake that is brown. You can get them that are almost an orange tint, but they all fall within the same species. And that really kind of struck a chord with me to try to figure out, you know, kind of how are they the same species if they're different colors. And that's kind of what led me to actually look into the genetics of them and how they can vary amongst themselves.
You know, genetics can be extremely complicated for the non-scientist like myself. You sent me some literature to kind of soak in before our interview today, and I mean, it just went. Can you discuss, and I mean very generically, general genetics and what it all means?
Yeah, essentially what we're going to be referring to here as far as genetics is reptile morphs, is what they call them in the pet trade hobby. What a morph is it's a physical alteration that'll make them look different in color, shape, pattern, or even size in some cases. Mm-hmm. I'll have an interesting example of that later.
Sure, and that's what we're going to launch into now. You brought with you, as I said, a mini zoo.
Right.
Let's start with what we have in front of us.
Okay.
I'm going to let you kind of go through, and we've got lots of time, but we're going to start with the geckos. Okay.
Well, what we've got here is a leopard gecko. What's important to know as we go into this is what is considered normal. The real term for it would be wild type, but in the hobby, a lot of times you'll hear it referred to as just a normal. So what we've got in front of us now is a leopard gecko that looks about like what you'd look like if you could go out into the wild and find one.
Mm-hmm. And that's normal, you said?
Yep, this would be normal. And how they got their name is pretty clear. They're a spotted pattern, kind of like a leopard or a jaguar. So what we're going to get into in this is how to compare to something else. Just with a simple little bit of selective breeding, what we can get are a completely different pattern and look to the same species. Mm-hmm. And how that's done is through selective breeding. What we've kind of noticed were certain examples of these lizards would have a different pattern to them. And what you kind of go into now with the genetics would be, we're looking at what's called a codominant gene. What means is this pattern is dominant to the normal pattern. So if you were to cross the two of these, half of them would come out looking like her, and half of them would come out looking like him. So what that'll actually do is this is called a hooded. He's got a little bit of pattern to his head and just a hair to his tail. So anyway, what you'll notice is a slight alteration can cause a huge difference down the line of selective breeding. So after several generations, we've got something that looks like that. Eventually, through breeding something like this, we can get a patternless.
A patternless gecko.
Which will completely remove the normal pattern from the leopard gecko. Mm-hmm. Here you can kind of see them side by side there.
So if you did breed these two together, they're two dominant genes, so you would get some patternless and you would get some leopard geckos?
Yep, it is called the codominant. The actual term for it would be an incomplete dominant. On the flip side of that, if you were to take two of these guys, you can get a super form of it, which would be a complete dominant. If you would breed that, say, to this guy, they would all come out looking like this.
This guy's also shedding. I
yeah,
said, what's wrong with his tail?
He's a little flaky on his tail back there.
Tell us about the gecko. What is their makeup and kind of their temperament and what they do? And
these guys are pretty common.
They look scary. I mean, that's the thing.
You think so?
Not like a cute little Labrador retriever, but
these guys are kind of one of the more popular lizards in the pet trade. In fact, this is what a lot of people get their start with, is these guys in particular. And the reason being is they're a very timid little guy. I mean, I've had tons of these guys before and very few incidents to talk about as far as aggression wise. These guys are insectivores, actually from the Middle East. So they're predominantly wanting to eat crickets, roaches, worms, and larvae.
And do you keep them together, or is there habitat different?
In a large enough context, you can keep like small colonies together. Typically, a male will kind of claim dominance over several females. So usually the balance would be one male to 2 or 3 females in a large enough context. I myself prefer to play it safe, and I like to keep all of mine separate. And that way you kind of eliminate the risk of
And you
maybe
said
a
as
nip.
long as you've had geckos, you've only had them nip at you twice. And when I say nip at you, you kind of giggled because it's not like they've got big fangs and they're digging into you.
The teeth are really meant to dig into bugs, to crush bugs. In fact, like they'll latch on, but they won't even draw blood. It's more kind of just pathetic than it is scary.
So is the patternless and then the co-pattern, are those natural or not? You said the leopard was more of the natural.
These are more what you would consider like they've had help from man. You wouldn't really see anything like that in the wild too often. Nature's fairly meticulous in its design. Whenever it comes up with something like this, there's a reason for it. A lot of it has to do with survivability, camouflage within the natural environment. So something bright and yellow like that usually is kind of like a neon sign above it in the wild advertising.
So these two are not natural. You said this one would
Yep.
be something that could, and very well, it could be camouflaged under whatever sort of nature's elements that are out there.
You'll see a lot of these guys out in like rocky outcrops, and they're fairly indigenous to the Middle East regions. You'll see them some regions in Iran, Pakistan, some in India even. Mostly they stick to dry land, like dry grasslands, rocky outcrops, and the like that.
Since their habitat is like that too, do you create something like that for them?
What I like to do is I like to try to keep them as natural as I can. So I do real dry, like a dry area I'll make moss beds. That way if they want to kind of cool off and kind of wet themselves down, which is kind of good for their shedding, they can go lay down in a cool, moist area. But for the most part, I try to emulate more of a desert region.
Kyle, if we can, let's switch gears because you've brought some other pets with you today. As you're putting our geckos away, why are ball pythons one of the more high-profile snakes out there? And you brought several with you today.
Yep. In my opinion, what it is with the ball pythons is they're a pretty reasonable size, all things considered for a python. Usually your females will top out around 6 feet, which sounds fairly large until you
Sounds massive.
until you see a 6-foot python in person. Usually it's a little underwhelming. What I'm going to show you here, she's around 4.5 or 5 feet. And keep that in mind as I pull her out because it'll be fairly surprising to hear that.
She's 4.5? Huh.
She'd be right around that mark.
And I do remember, if this was the same reptile you brought on a couple years ago, she was just a little thing.
Yep, she's been with me for a little while now. But going back to your question there, these guys have a fairly docile nature about them. Usually their first instinct when they get scared is they want to pull their head in rather than strike, which is how they get their common name of ball python. They'll tuck into a ball and protect the soft part, which is the head. And what that ends up doing is because that's their natural response, kids can handle them. I would usually suggest an adult be present for that. But they're just not prone to aggression. And as far as their environmental conditions, they're pretty easy to keep regulated.
Oh, talk about her pattern, because we're going to get into genetics. Is this something that's typical?
This would be what,
unique?
if you were to go find one, these guys are indigenous over to Africa. If you were to go pull one out of the bush, this would be about what you'd look at. Very dark pattern, something that will blend into the bush pretty easily. What we're actually going to take a look at would be a couple recessive genes in the ball python, and a couple very extreme examples of that.
When we talk about snakes, and you've got two varying different snakes, there are a lot of genetic patterns, variations, that sort of thing. Probably there's some that aren't even known.
There's always new ones coming out. Mike Wilbanks of Constrictors Unlimited, I believe, is his company, actually just came up with a scaleless ball python, which would be one of these guys here, except they look like silk. You don't see any of the scalation pattern on them. They're just a completely smooth snake.
And that's Lilith, right?
Yep, this is Lilith.
And her pattern is fairly normal. You said that that's what you would find in the wild. I mean, if somebody wanted to get a python, that's probably the typical look. What is her scales? I mean, what is her pattern?
They would consider this just a normal pattern for a ball python, which will be, usually a kind of a camouflage pattern of blotches of copper, browns, and blacks.
Now that's quite the opposite with the other python that you have in your hand. She's beautiful.
Yeah, this is probably one of my favorite morphs that's out there right now. This one's called a piebald, and it gets its name from having long sections of just pure white scales to it. And you can see this type of pattern in other animals. A lot of times you'll see it in horses. You'll have like your painted horse was the name that it's given. Probably the most famous example is our national bird, the bald eagle. Gets its name from the piebald section of white on its head.
So how did this snake come about? Was it bred with a snake like Lilith that you're holding?
A lot of the times these kind of happen by accident. As you're breeding different genetics, down the road you'll get something that just kind of hits you out of left field, because you're never just passing one gene. For example, if we're passing down the piebald gene from generation to generation, there's potential that there's something else in the bloodline as well that'll show itself down the road. And that's pretty much kind of what happened here with the piebald. Another example is there's one called an ivory, which there's two ball pythons that have, or one morph that looks almost exactly like a normal, but when bred together they produce almost a pure white snake.
You mentioned, and I'm going to have you explain it again in case somebody's just now joining us, exactly what the morph is, or when you say morph, what does that mean?
A morph is just a genetic mutation that alters the physical appearance or the size of the animal in question. So in this case, the morph is called piebald, which would change a normal looking snake like this into something a little more outlandish.
But that's not something that you would see naturally in the wild.
Right. When it comes to camouflage, especially in darker species like this, bright, vivid colors, especially white, go kind of against nature's design, if you will.
So is man-made an actual term? I mean...
One could argue that. I usually prefer like man-assisted.
Sure.
This is stuff that can happen in the wild, but it's definitely been helped along by people. In fact, a bulk of what we have now, you would probably be able to be pretty accurate in saying man-made.
Is it easy to breed pythons in captivity? I mean, I suppose the easy answer would be yes, but then a part of me thinks, well, maybe not if they're not in their natural habitat.
Surprisingly, they are, and I think that's kind of what lends them to being such a popular species in the pet trade. What really kind of exploded that whole desire to make these was the albino in the early 90s, which I actually happen to have an example of an albino here. We'll kind of let Lilith do her thing here for a second.
Do snakes get along? I mean, do they even realize that there's another snake in the vicinity?
They tend to be fairly neutral with each other depending on the species. You'll have certain ones like your king snakes, which are known to eat other snakes. They tend to pay a little more attention to... So here's the albino.
Oh, wow. Male or female?
This one I believe to be a female.
Now, wow, that is gorgeous. When I think of albino, though, I mean, the red eyes give it away, but when I think of albino, I think of completely all white.
Yeah, what albinism is, it's a lack of melanin, which would be your darker pigments in the skin. What you would find in the reptile trade is a pure white snake is referred to as leucistic. It is the lack of all pigments.
So tell us more about this snake that you're holding.
This is what really made the ball python take off in the early 90s. Once they kind of figured out the secret to unlocking the genetics of it, it really exploded. See, this one's not one that I can breed to Lilith here and and get an albino. They're what's called a heterozygous. A heterozygous will be an animal that carries the gene but doesn't show it. So for it to actually come through and show, you want to breed it to 2 heterozygous snakes.
Say that again, because that's a big word.
What we'll refer to it as in the hobby here is het. We'll just shorten it down.
Okay.
So an albino, or a snake that's het for albino, doesn't show the albinism, but it carries the gene for it.
Okay.
You have to have 2 hets to make an albino.
So Lilith isn't an albino, so obviously you wouldn't get an albino if you cross these 2 together.
Right. She would, her offspring would carry the trait for it, but it wouldn't show. She would have to find, their offspring would have to find a mate that also carries the gene. And together when they breed, you have about a 25% chance of getting an albino.
How did the yellow come out? I mean, I know that's a
The yellow comes out, it's actually present in Lilith. It's the melanin in her skin that causes it to be kind of overshadowed by the darker pigments.
Interesting. You were going to talk too about the, is it called ratification? Not ratification.
Yeah, the common names.
The common names,
so
yes.
Kind of to tie what we're talking into here with species name in general is a lot of what we've looked at here actually just stripped away the name, the common name of these snakes. Ball python's kind of hard to do because they curl up into a ball and that's pretty easy to name. But we're looking at a leopard gecko here that has no spots and a leopard gecko that has no yellow to it.
Right.
Well, here is one that you won't see too often and the perfect example of what we're talking about here. This is a species of snake that is widely accepted to be the longest in the world. We've got just a kind of a small example of it, but this here is a reticulated python.
Oh my gosh.
When all said and done, a female of this species can be right around 18 to 20 feet long.
Oh
20
my
is kind of
goodness.
a rarity. Now what we're going to talk about here real quick is a reticulated python by nature should have a net pattern on them. Reticulation is kind of like a striated pattern like that. You'll see it on the underside of leaves. A lot of the animals that you see that have what looks like a net on the side of them can be called reticulated. What we're looking at here is a tiger reticulated python. His pattern's barred. So basically what this is highlighting is the importance of scientific names in reptiles. What we're looking at here is Python reticulata. We had Python regius, and this one's kind of a fun one. Eublepharis macularis would be your leopard geckos.
How would you get that?
This is selective, what species or the gene?
Well, the species, yes.
The species. First, you have to be a crazy person like me who is willing to house a snake that'll be
20 feet long.
a couple 100 pounds and
is it a male or female?
this one's a male.
And he'll get that big and long?
This one is actually a dwarf, so that's kind of a misleading gene. The dwarf in a reticulated python gets you right around a 14-foot snake.
And that's exactly what this guy's going to, what's his name? Have you named him?
This one doesn't really have a name. We just call him Tiger.
Tiger, well that's good. So again, the reticulation that you're speaking of is this.
It should be, but he's got tiger bars. His pattern should be fairly net-like to be like a true reticulated python, which he is. He just doesn't have that pattern.
So not what a normal python would look like.
Right. He's a deviation from what you would see in like a normal reticulated python.
Where do you think, Kyle, the future holds? You do a lot of research on this very subject. You give presentations on this. Where do you think it holds the future for genetics and reptile breeding?
Every year we're seeing new morphs coming out of like the ball pythons, especially now too in like the leopard geckos, and we're starting to see it in the western hognose more and more now.
What is the western hognose?
The western hognose is a fairly small species of snake. Usually they average less than a foot when all's said and done. And they're kind of an interesting species in the fact that they've got to avoid any kind of trouble, they'll play dead, where they'll actually lay on their back and you can put them on their belly and they'll keep flipping over. But they're a small, tame species of snake, and that is my opinion where the future of the reptile industry is going. more and more people are kind of deviating away from the ball python and more heading towards the western hognose.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, this has been an interesting segment of the Paw Report. I know it took a lot to get all of your animals with us today, but every time you come on, Kyle, I'm amazed, and I think, I'm gonna break my fear of snakes. I did touch them today, but I just can't bring myself to hold it and let it slither all over me. We'll get there next time. But Kyle, the reptile guy, thank you so much for talking a little bit about genetics with us. You made it easy to understand for us non-scientific folks. So thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
All right, and we'll see you next time here on the Paw Report. Thanks for joining us.
Dave's Decorating Center is a proud supporter of the Paw Report on WEIU. Dave's Decorating Center features the Mohawk Smart Strand Silk Forever Clean Carpet. Dave's Decorating Center, authorized Mohawk Color Center in Charleston.
OCA Vet Clinic in Tuscola and Dr. Sally Foote remind you to properly take care of your pets and are happy to help support the Paw Report on WEIU. OCA Vet Clinic located at 140 West Sale Street in downtown Tuscola. More information available at ocavetclinic.com.